It is indeed.
Serious?
Welcome to our bathroom break. We'll be right back. So here we go, Dev Meeting number 40, discussing the book series part 8 of the development of that. So welcome. This is the Portal Mountain development meeting, of which we've been doing for the last year and a half or so. One thing of note straight up front, we use a lot of words which are used in different ways than most people would, or some confusing words. We've basically been developing our own lexicon, which we've been utilizing to give a language to speak about these types of things that we go over. So don't be overwhelmed by that. Yeah. There's a glossary and all that.
As usual, if anything bothers you, you can ask or you can assume and fuck off.
Yep, right. Mention in chat. Let's get that, although the YouTube chat's usually not very active, but we can add that up and share with the Portal Mountain community, the Portal Mountain lobby peoples. So just give me a second here.
By the way, the only people I said to fuck off to is the people that would prefer to assume. Just so we're clear, I don't expect everybody to be in that boat. I'm not that mean.
Oh, anybody... Our viewers and followers at this are a very limited set of peeps from Portal Mountain Lobby, pretty much anyways, so...
Still gonna mention it.
But I do...
It's all that buttery stuff.
Every damn time. And, yes, of course, that's a common theme. All the wonderful tons of different things we do as a civilization. The zeitgeist, if you will. Things have gone very awry, very astray, and we can all feel it. We know things are wrong with the Earth, and it seems like there's nothing, well, not wrong with the Earth, yeah, like from an alien point of view, yeah. Earth.
Thank God it all gave us the computers for us to be able to talk about it.
Earth is fucked up right now. That's what they say, and they would just keep flying.
Just gonna bring in that perspective point of mine. Thank God you have the computers to talk about all of this stuff.
Yes, and get blamed for not taking action. Excuse me, typing on the internet is action.
Well, you know what? It seems to be true.
It is true. So let me finally share the link itself. Don't want to forget to do this.
So
leave everybody hanging.
While you do your technical stuff.
Oh, we're just we're gonna recap here a little bit of some of the things that we were talking about in the last meeting, which was awesome. We kind of backed up a bit, talked about the tether, the self, neurosis, psychosis, all these personal self issues which make us shitty. And if you add a turd to another turd, all you get is a pile of shit. So this is why. That's
the main theme, yeah. I just wanted to mention that we're going to veer off of our.
That's very. That's going to be title worthy right there. Pile of shit.
So we're going to veer off our tendency to recap everything and go over the last meeting.
Right. Yeah, we're not going over the whole book.
This is due to some time constraints we have today, but also it's just very loaded, and if we keep recapping, we're just not going to get there. So, for that reason, we're going to briefly recap on the self and sort of build off on the concepts that we've been building already, like the ontological matrix, its origin and its consequence it's carving out into artificial scarcity or abundance potentials, and sort of talk about from the conversations about the self to the consequences of what it happens when it's appropriated by the market machine, or commodified rather. And in fact, you know what? Commodification and appropriation could kind of be model versus system ways of looking at the same concept. Anyway,
interesting
tangent. the point really being is that once we've established that, we need to build up a couple of mechanisms by which the system maintains that hold, and also the okay, now that we have this, so what is this that we're trying to actually accomplish with having established this situation, which I've tried to sort of picture a little bit more visually earlier on in our preparations here, and hopefully we
it's great. We'll get into
hopefully
that.
we can push that picture out into your mind to see the connections that we're trying, but maybe not very much succeeding in connecting.
We are succeeding. It's a
well,
hyperstation.
if we were succeeding, we wouldn't have to repeat ourselves as much too.
This is just what success looks like, my friend.
I'm just speaking to the clarity of it, to like really hone in and be able to like really articulate. We've built all of these things. Why did we take so much time to do it?
You were mentioning before the meeting, an irony in simple things is that if you don't explain them fully, they're no longer simple.
Yeah. This is more of an what do you call it?
So like
an anecdotal sort of thinking on my part, but my experience has shown me that in order to get a very simple idea across, I tend to have to do much more talking than I would have than if I were satisfied with not getting the idea across
even
clearly.
though it's quote unquote simple.
Yeah.
Really, the there's a lot of background side knowledge that we should already have, I guess, is probably what you're saying.
It's not the thing
Ideally.
that's simple. It's not the thing that's complicated. It's the context that's complicated, but by extension makes the whatever thing a simple element of that context. So it's having to get into the context is what makes it convoluted.
Right. Yes, indeed. And herein lies the difficulties, and one of the reasons why I want to write a book, to kind of just get a milestone. And this is how this is where we're at with how to describe this stuff.
To give context.
Yeah, to do all of that, and then the simple ideas. Hey, let's start a guild. Oh, what's that? Oh, here we go.
Context.
Oh boy.
The guild is simple. The context in which it appears is not. Yeah. So that's the difficulty. That's true.
Yeah.
Very true. Okay, I'm doing a lot of talking again, and I tend to overwhelm.
No, it's fine. I think we're on the right track anyways. We wanted to just kind of go over a bit of what did we want to review like the self and like all the ways that neurosis and psychosis, they kind of mangle your mind, and so utilizing that form of connection with others in a social context via the ego is bound to be a pile of shit.
So
that's what happens.
So the reason we want to recap that is because we want to demonstrate that from the natural complex adaptive system arises a somewhat artificial scarce system that is one of its potential outcomes.
Right.
This particular outcome is, for lack of a better word, is very lucrative when it's introduced, but then it has a tendency of hijacking. The analogy I like to use for this process is like being addicted to a drug. The initial boost or whatever it might give you is lucrative. You start to neglect other sources of that
life.
ability.
Other parts of life.
Because all a drug does is enhance a natural thing to begin with.
So
right?
the ego is
Something
like a drug.
Yes, that's the analogy.
And this is also we've talked a lot about the breakaway civilization. That's just what I would call that.
So ego is like a foreign agent. Self will be the drug. In the analogy, self will be the drug. That's the thing you get addicted to. Ego is the mechanism in which self is obtained, if you will, however
perpetuated
and however ineffectively it's done. That's the neglect portion of it that we've alluded to before, but could go over again for clarity when the time comes for content. In fact, it'll have to be clear because otherwise, what's the content for?
Right, and we want to right now just kind of spell out a bit of an arc of where we want to go with this.
So arc begins with the affect chart. The affect chart here becomes very important due to the It's a propensity for manipulating the moment into a tether to the dream, which we would refer to as psychosis. And the tether and the tendency for perpetuating the dream itself would be the neurosis.
Affect chart.
Yeah. So this chart is about the conceit calculation and how that...
Maybe I could put something, and Photoshop something under that.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And how that is causing the self ideal to become an object of a narrative or a subject of a narrative, and perpetuate into the next moment to give credence to the dream in which that self is realized.
And we brought up
details that have explanations that precede this.
Talking about the self-reference, we brought up also the polyglottic coin, the Hall of Mirrors, the Funhouse, as it's been called, the referencing itself.
So there is there's material that illuminates where we get our version of self that we're discussing right now from.
So we want to be able to see and experience that at a lower layer, which is more fundamental to this, not only the self that emerges from that as an object, but also the ego, which hijacks that self ability to objectify one's body in existence. The ego is hijacking it into a market, right? So this kind of steps.
So the ego is like a link to the market for the self to keep purchasing itself from the market over and over and over again. And the conceit calculation is used to evaluate how this purchase is going to be obtained through the continuation of the narrative, which itself is coming from the market. Therefore, the options are scarce as to how that story can be perpetuated, and the anxiety of losing oneself within the clusterfuck of all of these transactions about yourself is where our aforementioned self is actually lost to the wind and is only as being a utilized tool for this marketing transaction, which is ego as it appears for everybody at the same way, from different perspectives, which we then call agency. So ego is ubiquitous, selves are ephemeral, agencies are representations of the system.
Functionality.
Of the agents are representative of the market itself, but utilizing the like the wetware and software of us to execute its what do you would call them, actions or whatever the processes are. The processes, yeah. So when one agent, which is a self-ego combination, is no longer able to fulfill the said thing, another self and ego combined entity in the ontological matrix fulfills the role of the agent. And so the agencies don't really live and die by depending on who is living and dying, but the systemic operations themselves determine what agencies exist.
Yep. So a theme here comes up that we are seeing that life, complex adaptive systems, all this stuff is coming to a point where we're having something we would call the polymorphic machine. It's a learning, complex adaptive system, self-referencing, all this kind of stuff. And imagine that as a plateau, a platform on which anything can land. Now,
it's a horizon plateau too, beyond below which nothing can be, like, if you will, in this sort of understanding. That's the bottom line.
Sure, yeah.
It's the most fundamental field of
as
play.
A self-referencing, polyglottic, all this.
What I'm trying to say is that we're not looking for a layer below that to talk about and explain. Like, we're talking that for granted. taken.
Yeah, right. So you're talking about the reality, whatever, quote unquote.
We have 19 minutes.
Nice. So this overall theme emerging right now, which I'm just seeing it, we have within this polymorphic machine, you do have selves arising. The objects are arising. There is an objectification happening.
So that was my point about ephemerality, rising and passing away all the time. Like it's like if you were to look at a lake in the moonlight, so the thing with the waves, and you see and you see the trinklings of lights. It's the same light, but it appears always so differently and disappears all the time. It's a good analogy as a metaphor for what self looks like in our parlance.
The ephemeral nature.
Yeah.
The rising and falling.
It's in a flash. It appears and disappears in flashes.
Yeah, the models are models of reality moving towards coherence and include these types of views and uncertainty and all that, and especially like decay, life, and death. But my point was, and just that we had been talking about last meeting about the self and hold on, I kind of lost my train of thought with the last meeting, but anyways, the plateau, this overall arc is that we're having a polymorphic machine which is being hijacked, quote unquote, by a market machine, which is utilizing the functions of that which is below, i.e. this function to be able to create this objective self, rising and falling object. Like a tiger comes out of the grass.
Into a scarce.
I calculate very quickly. This body needs to get the fuck out of there. Right.
Yeah, and it hijacks it and creates a scarce sort of pathway for it to be able to navigate the ontology itself. So for example, like really rough example, like being certified for something despite the fact that you've been dealing with something for your whole life. That's a shitty example because there's a lot of charlatanism involved.
Yeah, right.
So don't take
you
that
just
as
want
the gospel
the fakers
truth.
to get through.
Oh yes, that's the idea.
Yep.
With that said, I want to fake my way out into another piss.
Oh no! Why not make it a real one? And
who knows what I'm faking?
Yeah, so we'll take a quick break here and carry on.
Did you chant?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
so.
Go ahead.
It was just about the.
It's all you.
Last time we talked about the self and discussion of, so from the polymorphic, from the self-reference, that was
Yes.
the baseline we used.
Right.
We say, so emerges a self.
Yes.
And
through conceit.
So the book follows this self by describing the polymorphic machine, and from the self gets hijacked by the ego, a kind of another self-identity.
So it builds up
and
those entities. Yep.
This, in the book arc, we're now talking about the market machine, right?
Yep.
Which hijacks it. Now we're coming back, having learned full well this lesson of what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually organize to deal with that, to do it justice?
Having real, yeah. So now that we've described the shit pile, how do we
So this we're into practice.
Create a context for it to properly be, what do you call it, decomposed into the environment, as opposed to creating more of itself in the environment.
Right, like a compost pile.
as opposed to a shit pile.
Right. Ah.
So how do we stop the earth being from a shit pile, but
We start
but
composting it.
moving everything back into the way it used to be, where if you shit in one place, it gets decomposed into another and becomes something else. Life, the perpetuality of life. So right now we're not doing that. We've reached a death point, but then we stopped recreating the life part that allows for death to even happen, which is why we probably are obsessed with immortality as we are.
The unknown.
Because we're not looking at what is perpetuating life, but we're trying to subjugate death instead.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a weird twist to
avoid what kills.
our mentality.
Avoid what kills and never talk about death.
Through killing, through killing and destruction.
But support the war.
Yeah. I might need to go downstairs.
Oh yeah, yep. So we're on another break here then.
Oh, 12 minutes. Never mind.
Oh no, okay, we're good.
My bad.
False alarm.
I'm gonna smoke.
False alarm. So this book is actually totally awesome already, as we've laid it out. Very excited about it.
Very awesome. But again, if the purpose of your reading this book is to how to understand what the market can do for you, I'm going to suggest not reading it.
Well, we have to expect that too.
Oh, no, I'm just going to be flat. Like I want that to be in the prelude of like if your expectation for reading this book is X, Y, Z.
And honestly though,
by all means, don't read
actually,
it.
I disagree with that. Pardon me, because I think that we want even a business relationship with that which is outside the shell of the guild.
Sure. What we don't need is a conversation that is a non-conversation about the merits of something being said, taken out of its context.
If you're trying to commodify it rather than appropriate it.
Yeah, just don't bother, because the conversation is going to go nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we already know that, and we won't. I know I won't have it.
It's fine. We got our niche.
We're in a niche, guys.
Yep.
Anyway, enough being.
Yeah. So so these are the first two major sections, we could call them: the polymorphic machine, the market machine, and then practice.
So
That's
are we
kind of
recapping the self
we
now,
call it
or
guild dynamics? I think we've already done quite a lot of it, and I don't know that we need to go over it. But if you want to give like a 2-minute, like, what's your view of the structure right now, and where are we going with this?
So the point I'm trying to. I do think that, yes.
We wanted to introduce these various different charts that we're using: the primordial archetypes, the neural chemical operating system, and the primordial archetypes, natural guilds.
So our main concern was to basically say at the very beginning of the book, there is a plateau, an abstraction we call a plateau. The next thing that we discussed is the dynamics and the mechanics that we assume that go into building this plateau, and so how do we arrive at this, and why is this structured the way it is. And so what I wanted to discuss a bit more is the internal structure of the ego as a follow-up, because that's sort of like discusses the thing that we need to shelter against, right?
Right.
So we've built up the plateau, and we've got to the point of ego, and now we're going to start detailing ego and its operation. And the real caveat of ego is that while it tends to look like it mimics the preceding model that we're discussing, a
polymorphic machine,
complex adaptive system that self-replicates and all of that jazz, you do still see self-replication of ego, but the problem with ego is that unlike the rest of the system, which has variance to it, the ego only recreates ego regardless of scale. So that's where I want to segue.
You can kind of see that something's broken. You're not using a methodology, a model of stacking, holonic stacking.
Right.
The holonic stacking stops at the point of ego, and it's just ego in this pyramid thing.
That's the first problem. The second problem is why that happens, which parts of the model are being hijacked to allow this sort of retardation of life to happen. And by that I mean slowing down for anybody concerned. This full-blown retardation of life, of the archetype, the primordial archetype of life that we've discussed, and its implications. And to fully demonstrate what it is that's being that we're building a membrane around, so that the same repetitive ego stacking does not occur on the same plateau that had built it up to this extent in the first place. So despite the fact that the plateau is ripe for ego, what we're trying to demonstrate is that there is also enough tools in that same plateau to build a shelter
very versatile,
that reaches back into the older primordial system and allows the same variance to actually exist in that plateau despite it being ego based.
And so this is really,
that's the long-winded way of
this is the
recapping what
argument of saying you can work with what exists, with what's already there. You don't have to destroy everything, you don't have to kill everything, you don't have to start over from scratch.
Another segue of working on yourself, because the tools are already there, aka if you stop being the third producer, you're part of the shelter experience and quality of that.
Overall, species, civilizations, life forms out in space, I bet majority had to go through this entire ego stacking platform creation before they could then turn in and say, well, what's wrong? That just exploded, but we've got our shit together to the point where we can start sheltering something that's more holistic.
Well,
I bet the majority of species do that. That's what I'm saying. The majority of spacefaring and whatnot species of aliens out there, they mostly had to go through this. None of the civilizations, quote unquote, went through a tribal experience and had this mimetic medicine, natural mimetic medicine shared through the elders generation over generation, unbroken. I'm saying that basically almost never happens.
Not when you have externalization of memory, no.
Yeah.
Once that is introduced, it's gone. One of the main issues.
Just poof. And with that, we'll be right back.
the self.
2 topics before we move off of the self. Okay, which do
we good?
Yep. We're going.
I forgot the food downstairs.
No, that's fine. No, I'm good.
So it's just a brief thing. So we have the entire affect chart to tell us that, or to point us
the tether
about to the
conceit tether,
to conceit and
stories we tell ourselves,
and the projection of self in a natural sense. So this is a discussion that gives not credence to, but depends on how you think about stuff. Anyway, the mental gymnastics.
Like trauma is natural, that you don't do thing again. That's conceited.
So the affect chart, really, in its most fundamental essence, is pointing to why there is a moment versus a dream. Like really, the whole thing is to demonstrate why there's one versus the other to begin with. So in the moment, that's when the narrative is constructed, and the dream is when the narrative is, assembled. So
you're in the thing that was constructed.
So a piece of it is constructed in the moment. That piece that gets constructed in the moment gets combined with other pieces that have been constructed in other moments to give the narrative arc. So the entire affect chart is to really demonstrate something that's more or less natural. With the ego, the difference is that in the narrative exist transactions which allow conceit to, in a foreign language, to determine what's better, what's the same, what's less than. So it's a foreign indicator of which way.
So it's a hijacking of the natural conceit.
The natural conceit into a foreign sort of. This is why we refer to it as a foreign implant. So this narrative that hijacks conceit into making calculations based on itself is what, out of which ego arises, and what gives ego a normalization, because it's always the same idea. It's this foreign narrative that says self is better in this way, same in that way, less than in this way.
Right.
So
and this could be like how you relate to somebody else. I'm better, I'm worse than them. As to whether you respect them and listen to them or you don't, or you look down on them and give them commands.
Yeah, so what this does is outsources the self-referential element to a foreign abstract element that may or may not be isomorphic.
For example, because they may be a worker with a name tag a level down from you. See, all you have to do is look at the name tag and it tells you, you're my bitch.
And the story of the pseudo-history goes, essentially, is that in the beginning, if you will...
Bitch, a technical term, not
In the beginning, what that meant is that if you offload too many things to these extrinsic narratives about what the self should be, you will find yourself getting into a trouble, because in the technical sense, our systems were never developed really well.
Trying to make all these conflicting calculations that don't.
Yeah, so you end up working on the wrong thing, like we have with our diet. We eat crap all the time. Why? Because it's been substituted for us, and we're not dealing with that concern. But again, scale it back to Stone Age stuff, and what you get is that if you do this for too long, you just die, and you can't perpetuate that activity.
Right, but we have these plateaus, as we've called. That's plateaus of commodification.
Yeah, which each causing a significant delay in the outcome. Is the general sense of how to look at that, but there's more specifics to it. If need to be explored, we will. Now, my 2 minute into turning into 20 minutes is this.
And there's another second thing you wanted to mention.
Well, yes, the ego that arises from the hijacking besides it, and specifically the fact that the commodities that it supplies into that calculation is what we've been calling sadism and masochism, because all of these are in lieu of the self-reference that's ongoing within it, within the stack, in lieu of the neglect. It's like how to either offload that neglect somewhere else or how to internalize it.
Interesting. So at that point, it becomes a choice of who do I fuck over to feel good, or who do I let fuck me over so I can feel the masochist side.
In each case, it's like, how do I get a reward out of the punishment that's entailed otherwise?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this is the tether, in the sense of you don't want to get punished, so you always jump on board with the reward aspect of the calculation. And since the calculation is always formally fed, what's rewarded and what's punishing is very, very manipulative. Mm-hmm. To the point of completely being broken away from any and all of your actual needs, and as part of the original stack where this has come from.
Foreign conceit, as opposed to natural conceit.
Sure. But it also demonstrates why conceit is not the correct method by which to constantly live. Mm-hmm. Like it part of it is demonstrates, oh cool, yeah, but the other part of it we're trying to say here is that with this being the way it is that conceit is perhaps not the only avenue through which calculation of narrative should happen.
Yeah.
And that's where the altruistic side comes. Anyway, my point and all of that is
generic self-reference side of things, as opposed to self even.
Yeah, so I wanted to cover the fact that there is a foreignness to ego as opposed to self. I want to cover the fact that there's only two commodities that this is reduced to. One of them is sadism, the other is masochism, and they all have to do with how to move that narrative according to conceit calculations provided through those foreign narratives. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, the initial mention of the moment and the dream, which were part of the more natural element, are now can be described as hijacked elements from the outflow of ego, in the sense that the conceit calculation tethers one to the dream, making the dream the only reality to which we refer as psychosis, and the degree to which one believes things in it are real is the degree of the psychosis itself, and the inability to use any other commodity other than, or any other soundbite other than the two commodities provided of masochism and sadism as being a neurosis. So these 5 sort of subjects about the self that are really, really crucial to understand the playing field about ego, in which ego is finds itself against ego through different agencies.
These are like pitfalls.
Right. So this is a segue into now describing the ego stack and why it's self-crushing, for one.
Right,
the mechanisms behind the stacking being another side tangent, but the fact that it's stacking, for example, creates its crushing mechanism for itself. So basically,
to scramble to the top.
And the other element,
clawing everything below you.
And the other element is to it that the only way it reproduces is create more ego of itself, and so it has no other thing to do other than stack and crush itself under its own weight, over and over and over again, until it's so out of control it has nothing to establish itself on. Lovely. Which we would call that Armageddon.
Correct.
The apocalypse being the revelation of this is happening.
Right. Apocalypse being
to make
potentially
it,
better.
To make it simple.
Being better than that, potentially. I think we should appropriate those two for sure.
I think they have been for those exact terms.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can get food in a couple of minutes. It's just down there on the bench.
Yeah. So I find it interesting. Conceit is what's tethering you to the dream. Conceit, even just being a creation of a self-object in a situation like where a tiger is coming out of the grass, I need to get the fuck out.
I'm more important than the tiger's meal, for example.
So yeah, but that's a dream. You had a dream and now you're acting. This body is going through space and time.
Right.
to get the fuck out.
The dream gave you the belief that you need to move.
But in that moment, you are tethered to that dream, right? And rightly so, just naturally.
Which is different from the actual experience of the moment, in which there's adrenaline, there is the I need to move in this direction, or because this path is blocked.
Yeah, you don't normally sit there and think about, is this really a dream?
But then the memory of that is again the dream, or the anticipation of that is another dream.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the difference between being in the moment and in the dream, in a very simple way. And I guess the one way to relate for it to like make more sense and more perpetuality of like not being tethered to the dream versus being in the moment, which wouldn't really call it a tether at that point, although it does bear some semblance, and that is like the experience of being in the flow. Right, like it's not like you're tethered to the task, but the task does dictate what it becomes its own context, and therefore there's really only so many ways to do it.
More of a meta schedule.
That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, because like each moment modifies the next. It's not just that you can, dream up a series of moments and then proceed in sequence. Some things work that way. That's called technology.
Mm-hmm.
But life in and of itself is like, okay, this moment not only is a precedent to the next moment, but it shapes the context of what if anything can happen in that next moment. So maybe that next step is not even possible, or maybe it's not the right step anymore.
Yep.
And so on and so forth, and that's the real difference. So in the moment, shit changes in the dream all the time.
Mm-hmm.
In the dream, shit is...
Yeah.
The moment is made subservient.
The polymorphic machine, I think, is characterized by this continual refresh of context, and the market machine does not do that.
The moment is looked at as chaotic and in need of fixing within an established dream. Because if it doesn't produce the next step of the dream
itself,
something is broken.
The dream itself isn't what's being questioned or modified.
Mm-hmm.
It's that where that dream emerged. It's now broken away from that process.
Despite it coming from that process, and that is the key. Because all decisions are made in the moment by all the living things at the time. Leaving aside questions of simultaneity, which are a different tangent altogether in physics.
We don't need tangents.
It's physics, brah.
So we leave off the market machine section of the book with this horrific image of a stack of shit beings clawing at each other, just creating mass and destruction at the bottom.
All right, let's establish the stack. We've established ego. To establish ego stacking, pseudo-gender discussion needs to happen, and we are going to make heavy use of our Christmas special on the true nature of gender.
What gender is?
The true.
What was the title? Oh yeah.
The true nature of gender.
The true meaning of gender.
The true meaning of gender.
That's the one.
So, this is a brief discussion still. I don't want to get into too many difficult topics.
Yeah, I'm just thinking here. But yes, it's fine. I mean,
what we need to understand is that
we're still in the first hour here, so we can, self and all this recap.
Some primordial archetypes have been repurposed for, or no, not the primordial ones. The duality has been repurposed in this case. This is a following along the same line of. The moment being relegated to chaos, with the dream being relegated to order. Yep. In the dysmorphism
which would make perfect sense.
Of psychosis.
Makes perfect sense why we would think that way.
And then secondary to that, how do we reestablish the traditional gender representations for this new mechanism? So the traditional gender representation of female to chaos and male to order from mythological perspectives, is now taking a more crustified, solidified, pseudo
Right.
mechanical.
Talking about this ego stacking phenomenon.
A mechanical representation of tokenism in which the
and the sadomasochistic spread, dichotomy spread, whatever.
Where order is
spectrum.
Where order is effectively vacant of anything but whatever it is connected to make it look like it's order. So in this sense, I mean like being a cog in a machine. So if you're a part in the machine, you're recognized as existent, for example, right? And secondary to that, to bring into the fold the non-ordered elements of chaos with the pseudo-mother, which is to establish an indirect link through the pseudo-father towards that mechanism. So in essence of like taking all the commodified resources that the system makes available and organizing them within the egoic unit, so to speak. So this is a bit scale invariant, which makes it a little bit difficult to explain in concrete terms. So what we have to use is an analogy of the nuclear family to really drive at the example that's being discussed here, in which we take the in a nuclear family you have your father, your mother, your 2.5 children, and you have your father as the breadwinner, which is that hollowed out vacant access to the market, representation of the market.
Mm-hmm.
The father's never there, he's working. The mother takes care of the home to the dictates of the father. That's a nuclear, again, this is an ideological nuclear family we're talking about.
Right.
So we're not discussing real people here.
Just as an example of this,
Yeah.
this ego stacking phenomenon.
Yeah, it's all metaphorical, so please bear with that. And then you have them as sort of like a ubiquitous servitude to the household, to which the mother delegates all the subtasks to
the monogenders.
To complete the operational aspect of the household, if you will, so that the pseudo-father that plugs into the system can continue to do so, right? The support, it's basically the support system that is completely subservient after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have the alpha, the beta, the omega.
Yeah, the point of this is to establish a kind of abstract hierarchy in which you can see this kind of become scale invariant. So if you take the same image and now you transpose it onto the workplace and you have your boss, your managers, and your workers, it becomes the same image, just a bit more wider interpreted.
Yeah, like a higher up family.
Right. Scale it back down to the individual, though, and you have your conscience that tells you this is right and this is wrong according to society.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your self-needs that you try to accommodate for by having access to that conscious. So always tapered by arbitrary rules.
Mm-hmm. You know that the needs can be fulfilled in a certain way by interacting with a certain market.
Yeah, and basically the 2.5 children that sit underneath is basically anybody you can lash out at. So to enforce your sort of will, your authoritative...
I would almost want to throw that your entire body and all the organs up in that.
So yeah, forcing your
there.
body through complete shit situations. And
we work.
Yeah. So this is the rough outline of how everything plugs, of how agencies of various scales plug into ego. And then on top of that, because we went through the personal to the family to the workplace kind of example thread, that was to demonstrate where the stacking occurs.
Now, this whole ego structure can look completely different from the 2.5 nuclear family, obviously, right? So.
Oh yeah. The workplace. The workplace is one.
Of other scenarios, right?
So being conscient, having a conscience through which you could be made feel guilty, would be a very subtle form of the exact same structure,
yep.
Where your neural units is your ability to conceptualize. Then you have good ideas versus bad ideas versus neutral ideas, and then there is the whatever is emergent out of the entire thing being fed back into your conscience choice making again. So can I behave this way? Can I not? Can I? It's not supposed. The chart is as complicated as it is. The actual premise of it is not complicated. So
what we're describing here, it seems to be coming into mainstream cultural awareness through like memes like the NPC meme, who gets programmed by the news to tell them what's right and what's wrong, and they take that and just simply apply that to the situation.
So another way to look at it more abstractly then in this diagram is that if we were to take the whole thing as ego, the whole square as the representation of ego,
right?
On the top part we see all of the influences that are coming extrinsically, aka the market, the system, the sound bites by which conceit is traded. The pseudo father is the right and wrong determinator. This is right, this is wrong. Where the rest,
like a conscience.
The rest of it represents the
and simply right or wrong. It's sound bites. This sound bite comes up, that's wrong. This sound bite comes up, that's right. There's no context or like gray areas.
So at this point, we're at the archetype of order. So the rest is the archetype of the chaos, which is why it lands under the pseudo-mother general umbrella. And it's kind of like the rest of it is sort of subdivided into its mechanics, in which we have the actual field of chaos out of which ideas spring from. So our life itself brings up to the fore. So this is the most chaotic element of it. As you can see, that's the uncertain part that makes itself evident regardless of how much order you try to impose upon a system. And it takes those and then it's just basically yes, no, don't know. The yes, no is the pseudo-gender, and that is essentially the arbitrary decision of what goes, what doesn't, even the sound bites that are flowing in through the market. So the real distinction between the pseudo-father and the pseudo-mother is that pseudo-father makes no decisions at all. It's vacant of decision-making capacity, whereas the pseudo-mother takes in the sound bites and gets to make the decision of yes, no, to the effect of this is good, this is bad. So I said this wrong. If the pseudo-father says yes, no, it's just a calculation based on values, right? Like it's just a scale. There's no input. With the pseudo-mother, it's the spot in which we can say this is good, so yes, this should be allowed. So it's kind of like it's a filtering mechanism to allow the yes-no decision to know what's on each side of the decision.
Good things or bad things?
Yeah, so it's like if one element of this is the scale of the tipping point,
well, good or bad is
the other one is the one that feeds either side of it.
Good or bad seems more qualitative. Must be that rather than yes or no, a quantitative.
Which means that the sound bites coming in from the market have to dictate that. So there's still a kind of a vacancy in the pseudo mother making that pseudo. Right? There's no real decision. It's just just sort of like an overlay to make us believe that this is part of the old mythology, to which we are okay with, which we're intuitive with.
Interesting.
According to, if we were to take our own gender mythology as seriously as we did.
So yeah, I do like that we basically pull in this like the yin and the yang, if you will, and how it's been misappropriated by the ego.
Yeah, so the whole purpose of the pseudo mother is to take the undifferentiated outflow from the plateau itself, and to use the sound bites of the plateau to differentiate it into good, bad, neutral, good, bad, neutral, good, bad, neutral.
Yeah.
The things that are good or bad get more attention.
The qualitative package over the chaos.
Yeah. The good, bad things become, again, a representation of order. The omega stuff, the monogendered stuff, is generally relegated to chaos within that. So it's the liberals we shouldn't be listen to because they don't have any real ideas.
So this is interesting.
They just keep tinkering.
The pseudo father has the pseudo father is the only one with direct access and knowledge to the market, basically, really, because that's what they're doing. So that's like putting an ideological shell for the pseudo mother to take in and filter through all the qualitative what's happening, is it good or bad, based on that ideology,
exactly,
which links into the market.
Exactly. And if you're thinking right now that based on our nuclear family example earlier, that this is a specific male and a specific female in the nuclear family doing this, that's not the point. This could be one person doing this for themselves.
It's a structure that creates a unit.
Right. So this is more about differentiating what's order, what's chaos, based on sound bites that represent order only, which has the specific quality of being in a death cycle. I feel like
we're at 1 hour mark, actually, by a second. I feel like we've beaten the market machine dead at this point.
No, we need to beat it a bit more, because we just established why ego stacks. We then need to show two things about those stacks: the crashing, the Babel Tower diagram, and the flame, because those are the only two things that are relevant to ego as far as it goes. The reason.
Yeah. So we did bring this up this week in chat about the idea that when a breakaway condition happens, remember the abortion appropriation of the term abortion. We're not going to get into that.
No. Let me just say why I feel like that we need to do this. I just mentioned
but
earlier,
it is all decay and burning up. It's all burning up in
I just
flames.
mentioned earlier how ego stacking is different to the previous stacking that we've been describing with complex adaptive system. So with this diagram, we're demonstrating what is stacking with ego, and then we need to make sure that we establish that no matter how much ego stacks, what you get back is ego.
More of the same.
Not even more. Nothing changes. It's stagnant. It doesn't move. It's just ego, and it's a growing cancer kind of a thing. There's nothing about it is improving,
and it looks very
changing.
different from all the different scales of things that have come before it.
Right. So those two diagrams, this is just to show you that it will stack up. If you understand that this goes from personal to familial to general groupings, where you have any kind of authoritative, exclusionary, top-down.
I think we wanted to bring that one up.
So this is the simplest picture of what is a stack going to look like, which is just going to be a reward punishment system from an arbitrary sideline.
And it goes up like in perpetuity. There's no necessarily top.
because all of the rewards that is presented by the system are in relation to climbing the stack through conceit. That's where conceit becomes really important to ego. This is what causes the actual stack and climbing.
Even at the top, quote unquote, you're still scrambling to create new reward structures to come up even above those who are your peers. Like,
right,
it never
because
stops.
even at the top, this acceleration is the thing that presses you down. And even more so than you are at the bottom.
Exactly, because everybody has the means to really do that kind of shit against each other.
Mm-hmm. And so the other relevant picture is the parallelizing of stacks next to each other, which still don't get away from being one singular ego. So that's the flame diagram there, that in the clamor for the top, right? This diagram basically says, to the clamor for the top, we call that reform. This is an ability of creating new institutional mechanisms for stability within the stack to stave off the acceleration that was presented in the previous stack. Secondary to that of revolution is the separation of stacks in parallel, due to the fact that their reforms in questions aren't congruent with the ego agencies involved in the process, and so they separate into their own sub egos, still representing the same ego in general. And the net result of either case is at the bottom we see the lesser egos sent off to duke it out in a war. The disintegration is essentially what you could kind of like call it your poverty line. When society starts to have undesirables, and then it tends to just send off these undesirables to wage the physical dismantling of other ego agencies.
Well, you're at the bottom.
That tend to clamor over it in a stacking fashion to begin with. Yeah, so even these splits don't really stave off the stacking, because what you can find is that two revolution stacks will start to press. One will have more power versus the other, and crush it that way, which is what generally happens. You get splits and restacks and splits and restacks, but the final point of all of this is that you get ego stacking in this ontological matrix that we have, that doesn't amount to anything but just ego, more ego, more ego, just ego, more ego, and just ego.
Of course.
And yes, there's different agencies, but you'll find that the biological beings behind those agencies are churned, and other ones are picked up to keep representing the same agencies, giving them life, which are essentially have no life, and at the neglect of, aka the zeitgeist of, what it's operating on. And that is the story of
where it came
ego.
from.
And final point, the system which we keep referring to, the market machine, so to speak, itself ironically is not described by anything, but ego is the reflection of that description, where that description makes any sense. So to understand what is meant by the system as a whole, we only need to look at the collective effect on the ego and call that the system.
And a model of that.
This is why the system as an entity does not have a concrete representation,
right?
Except as a label.
So that's horrible.
What it does.
That's horrible. The ego is just burning itself up just chucking beings and bodies to the side, whatever it needs. And yet we need to know about this. We need to know about what this is because we're using this as a plateau.
Yes.
For something else to exist within it.
Yeah, the plateau in question that we're talking about is essentially composed of agency that is completely driven by ego. So, complete psychosis, complete neurosis, complete artificial scarcity, and so on and so forth. That is the context against which the membrane of the organism, the shelter of its operations, and all of that is built against.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Yep, we're not talking about revolution or destroying anything. We're being provided with these plateaus by civilization. Fine, this is what we got. We're going to model it so we know what the problem is, and we're going to shelter the guild from that to create a inner bubble reflects.
Not from that. We're going to create a shelter with sustenance as the elements that bring stuff in from outside the shelter in.
Yeah.
Still moving on the same constraints as before the ego stack is formed, just overlaying them on top of it.
But
and expelling garbage out.
By shelter, I guess I mean shelter from the ego. I guess I meant like an educational type of response.
This is the same thing.
In that guild will do.
I'm just being a dick about painting the picture.
Ego will do ego. It will always crash and scramble and destroy everything. So this is why I kind of put it that way. That we're kind of sheltering an inside through education of, hey, this is the ego. We've all got it. We all need it to operate in this plateau. But we're gonna shelter against the type of behavior and activity that does to create bubbles of life.
So what we're doing is that we're modeling a behavior that is not based on the ego itself. We're saying, yes, this exists on the side. This is the conceptual reality, if you will, of that.
And we're using all the mechanics of ego.
And then given that, we are going to step back, go back to what an organism is with its maintenance and sustenance and whatnot,
right,
and say, how does that look like on this plateau full of ego and agency that it represents?
Right.
What does growth of life as it used to be in the natural world looks like on this very unnatural plateau that we have after the fact?
And how does it reach back to the point of origin where things got fucked up, let's say, the breakaway condition?
No. How does it reach back and become the same thing as that which was before?
Right.
The breakaway.
You start with, one step at a time.
How does it mirror that? That would be the question, because it's not going to be that. We can't go there.
You can't go. You can't turn back the clock.
So how can we see this plateau that we do have as that again? And this is that view, return to that view, which is by all means
totally correct.
Is just as artificial as everything else that is on this very plateau.
And yet, by what part of what we mean when we say using a holonic model has to involve this idea of uncertainty, that at every node, at every holon that you can think about and conceptualize, you're allowing that uncertainty, that it's not just what it is, but it contains everything in it. What is everything? It's not all defined. It's not written down. Everything is a giant question mark that comes from every point outwards.
Something that is actively denied by agency, because agency can only be realized by being a part of by being a specific cog in the machine, and therefore if it's not that cog, it's not that agent.
So the holonic model has built into it that idea of that, how can you contain everything within you? You don't write it down. That's a part of the interpreter of that model to say, okay, what could it be?
Another bike wrench into the spoke wheel. It's also about how everything that you are is ephemeral, to the point of where one moment to the next, even if they are like instants apart from each other, it's okay to not be what you just were. These things are not.
Yep.
These are things that agencies don't allow for.
Right. Yeah. True. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Just holding on to a hard model, moving through time in a mechanistic way. So yeah, with this holonic model, that you'll find this stacking happens from what we call fundamental to significant. In these layers, they kind of build up, and they're having different units. It's not just an ego on top of ego on top of ego. You're having a different language at each layer. This is complex adaptive systems. This is a whole different way to model reality, and it I think allows you to talk about things in an open way and not block them all off, right?
Well, yeah,
primordial archetypes.
The defining features is that one stagnates by what do you call it? Standardization, for example, or history is being a single record of events. You know what I mean? Like there's this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's not great examples, but.
Yeah, we all think of history as history. That's what it is. But actually, every perspective has a completely different view on it.
I've always been fascinated of how indigenous history. The example I know of is very limited, and it's to Maori in New Zealand and everything like that. But one of the key things that really, really stood out to me is that when it came down to writing down what their history was, is that they only really talked to very few chiefs. And the thing is that in those tribes that were scattered all over the place, they all had different variations on the similar themes, but it always slightly different and modified and evolving.
Yeah.
And so the true story of their mythology, for example, once it was written down, it was written down by just using a single variation of that, and therefore, dominant. And now, as a net effect, the rest of them are getting displaced and erased off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Right,
because you can't get a book for those other ones.
And the irony behind that is that if we're talking about mythology, grabbing a single variant of it as a single source of truth is already suspect.
Yep.
But the very fact that there were variations on this mythology that are all neglected and cannot be captured by a single book or a narrative at all, because it depends on who's talking.
Good example.
Like it made the entire exercise entirely pointless. And here's why it's pointless. What they recorded only pertained to a very small number of people out of the whole that subscribe to the mythology.
It would have had to be presented in a way like, this is the local spiritual terrain that we investigate, and there's all kinds of other creepy things that
you need a book for here, a book for here, a book for here,
no, you can never have, but every book has to acknowledge the other books.
That's what I'm saying, and they all have to be rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, meaning the oral tradition actually satisfied this far better. And again, my point is that we didn't really get Maori mythology out of this. We got a sliver of potentially acceptable.
We got a sliver, and in trying to get that sliver, we destroyed.
And then filtered to shit.
Destroyed all the other ones.
Through different cultural views too, after the fact. So do we have any clue about what their mythology actually might have been?
And then they are the chosen tribe. They're the chosen tribe. All the other tribes must bow down.
Yeah, because that's the writing that survived.
Because they happened to stop there.
Not to mention that their writings were not about authoritative things.
Yep.
But really, the point is that I know this is more of a tangent than anything else, but this progression towards ordering things into specific sound bites definitely has a quality to it that is completely reversed to its intended purpose. Again, this is important. Again, this is important to mention because the entire premise of the soul and the zeitgeist is based on these really, really subtle elements of neglect. You can't prove a negative. You can't exactly explain how something is neglected by doing this, and that, without mentioning how.
So,
So
if I may, this polymorphic machine, it's done justice through holonic stacking models, complex adaptive system type modeling, which are strange loopy isomorphic to that complex adaptive system of life of which you all came from. That's what we want to get into next bit after break or whatever, and talk about these different stacks. All three of these stacks that we've made, the neurochemical operating system, the natural guilds, and the primordial archetypes are all stacks in which each layer is another language, totally different language, and they're all stacking. So you have different units being created, and this is what we see all throughout life. If you want to model something in a way that takes in uncertainty and all this.
So we'll get into these stacks by going to the spectrum of stupidity as the end result of ego stacking being the ontological matrix available to us. Right? In particular, the it's order and chaos stuff. Let's see. We need to have our artificial scarcity, agency, ego, and the psychosis that is involved in looping around a single set of sound bites as the dream, right? Because of that psychosis,
you want to bring in neurosis and the tether, the conceit.
Hold on. I'm trying to articulate an arc here. So where are we going with this again? We're going to why the spectrum of stupidity is important to disseminate. So, artificial scarcity, agent ego, matrix, ontological matrices make us all locked in to specific soundbite
dreams.
Circuits. Dreams, circuits, whatever, same thing.
Yep.
And being trapped in these circuits without a proper template for them allows for the perpetuation of these sound bites to continue.
Trapped without a model.
Yes, to continue to feed back into the ego, into the conceit calculation, and by ignoring all of these things that could be very easily overlaid on top of them to circumvent them. Right.
Pure ignorance, and hence education.
So a lack of self-reference within the sound bites, which is what these stacks are offering, a self-referential element to the narratives being perpetuated by the self-conceit, by the conceit calculation as ego agent creation.
So self-referential model.
Holy fuck.
That is correct.
That took a little bit of brain breaking. And they say mental gymnastics are not repeatable.
Of course they are.
Yes, it says mental gymnastics all the way down, baby.
But it's never the exact same mental gymnastic.
Well, the next gymnastic is based on the previous one, so.
And with that, we'll be right back. Unmute it.
I'm gonna tell this to you though.
We're still on break. We're eating burritos.
Once we've established the entire plateau composed of ego, I mean, we now have to repeat what does the complex adaptive system stacking has to look like in that landscape context.
Not only that, but at what exact point in the complex adaptive system do we see the ego coming out? Can we point to that in charts?
No, see, the beauty of this is that hijacking the ego, re-hijacking the ego.
Yeah, we're gonna hijack the ego.
To start to trade in.
Well,
that's the commodity for
everything needs access to the market.
If the market commodities supplied to you are primarily that of sadism and masochism, which has to do with
reward
and punishment and offloading it somehow.
If that's all you got,
then the commodity that the model presents itself with, which isn't differentiated,
is some kind of a reward structure.
We have it.
So,
what is the reward structure? No, hold on. Here's your test. What is the reward structure?
You feel good when a model applies.
Where do you step up in rank?
Coherence. Right.
The reward, or
not only that, but the
reward.
Dopamine surge that comes with realization and all that.
So the dopamine surge that articulates this reward as a conceited calculation is participation style, but coherence in the form of isomorphism, like this isn't a reward anymore, this is just the way it is membership and mastery.
Right.
That is another distinguisher. So
Okay.
So isomorphism.
Yes, I see.
And this comes from straight up from Buddhism as well.
I see where you're at.
Buddhism has like two different versions of right view. One is your mundane right view, and this is where you honor your father, honor your mother, and all of these kinds of like various. It's a poem basically.
Sound bites, kind of like platitudistic sound bites, which happen to be isomorphic.
So right view from that perspective is like viewing rewards and punishment of progression, aka climbing the degrees of coherence, as a tangible, ephemeral things that you can obtain.
This is great.
Whereas the other one is just a way of being.
But still, the road to participation is paved with a system that the ego can interface with.
Exactly, and this is the claim really is that there is a system that perpetuates what we dub as the ego.
That's a very important part of
participation. Within which there's a tether which functions by the specificity of these commodities, and ultimately in this playing field, the deal is that you use this next layer commodity of coherence as your commodification of reward and punishment, much like the system has already done. All right, but just imbuing them with further and further context, with the ideal of completely modeling it, so that there no longer are rewards or punishments; they're just outcomes.
Interesting. I like that linkage there. I think that'll be important for the book. Especially to have that kind of notated.
Well, we've been talking about coherence in many different ways, but now this is the first time we've not only connected it to
affect.
We've connected it to actual affect processing as a commodity,
which can be used to hijack the ego itself.
Reutilizing the fact that we are in a commodified plateau. So nothing is not a commodity, not even a coherence, but the value of coherence as opposed to other values of any other commodity is by definition already ranking higher given the acceptance of this model.
Right. So the outward appearance of the guild should be like feeling good, great, like it's a celebration and just participating and it feels good.
Yeah, so the charlatan will take that and create a self-help book out of that. Right off the bat. So we're acknowledging this fact. This is the case. We cannot escape it. The difference is whether you're actually receiving further rewards from coherence versus... Well, this is not even a good way to say it, because the problem there, if we just leave it at reward and punishment, imagine disconnecting from the system in a way that the system responds with punishing you. So there is a caveat there to be had, is in that the disconnect from the system is completely total, in that you can never really investigate the reward of the model based on any soundbite coming in from the system that is not about coherence. This is the only thing that keeps coherence, the coherence commodity survivable in the face of masochism and sadism as alternatives.
Is simply the continual projection of the education of the model.
Meaning that once that is the output of the intended commodity, it is a direct conflict with sadism and masochism. Albeit mild forms of it can still be utilized to encourage it. So this is where we have to use the same tools of the trade.
I was also thinking, like, obviously, or not obviously, if you've been listening or keeping track of the conversation on scarcity, this guild structure is an infinite amount of more potent to meet needs and demand than the market machine, right? So
in particular,
so you can have rewards, quote unquote, in there that encompass all of what the market machine could ever give you and then some.
In particular, because of the focus on the moment, right? With the market machine, it's all about trends. So what you can get out of the market is based on what you could get out of the market before. It has no capacity to incorporate what is happening right now into itself, unless that right now somehow fits a bill in a very scarce manner.
Yep.
Or foots a bill. Is that? I forget the expression.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess this really, really hammers down what ego is and agency is for the purposes of us continuing. And then we need to establish that aside from ego stacking, in and of itself being a sort of, we've been painting ego stacking as the negative of this, so I think now it's time to sort of give credence to where that thought comes from. With the discussion about being stuck in the world of things, which is the consequence of narratological focus. So things that appear in narratives are...
So a dream.
Yeah, so
dream state.
so the psychosis that allows the dream to become the reality, the taking that reality and making a spectrum out of that is a reality of things according to the ontological matrix, and we divided it into two sort of extremes. On the one side, you have objectivism, on which things are judged based on their reality or unreality, and the other side of the spectrum, things are just judged based on their morality or immorality, or ethics rather, based on their ethical values. In all cases, though, the thing to note is is that the spectrum of things, if you will, are in and of entities that are in and of themselves. So the belief in their reality in and of itself, their axiomatic, so to speak, reality, is...
This is a model problem again. It's not a holon. If it was a holon, in interpreting it, you would understand that it has the hole in it. In other words, a giant question mark. That is not the case with systemic machine-like appropriation.
Yeah, where tokens are standing in for specific representations, where symbols have been transformed into signs, and artifacts have been made concrete into the next phase. The point being there is...
Because the ego itself is a hard thing that must depend on a platform, a plateau that allows that within the neurochemical operating system.
So yeah. So part of this discussion is to simply say that with the case of artificial scarcity, the entire ontological matrix is downsized or constrained contained into a specific ontology of things, based on whatever language that can support what things are, given the sound bites involved. And further, the psychosis as to it being the degree to which these things are, quote unquote, constitute what exists and what does not.
Right.
And
in a yes-no sense manner. It's not like in encountering life or encountering the unknown. It's a yes-no. Everything has a yes-no.
Yeah. So few things to note about this particular spectrum is that it exists specifically only in the abstract. So it's not about the reality of actual things that could be said to be real, so much as it is about their representations as ideas that are believed to be the reality instead of the things being represented.
So it's dreams that have no connection back to the moment.
Or necessary connection to the moment. Their connection to the moment is as a matter of isomorphism. The connection to stupidity, the connection to psychosis is the gravitation towards their reality or unreality as such. So if you firmly believe that metaphors are not real, right?
Therefore, don't apply it, don't listen to it.
Yeah, you're in the objectivistic side of the spectrum, in which delineates cognitive structures as category real, category unreal, one subservient to the other. The other side of the spectrum ignores the isomorphisms between the senses and focuses on the production of what's produced in the narratives as an overlay on top of that. So, given agency to inanimate objects, or
yes, and then from that perspective, you feel like you're expanding out as a solipsistic modeler, in objectivizing that solipsism, you feel that that's been, now you're enlightened, right?
Well,
so it goes the other way.
This is a case of where synchronicity goes
Philosophy,
wrong.
right? Remember we talked about it. I don't know if we brought this up. Philosophy and religion.
Philosophy and religion, but another idea is coming to me right now.
Subjectivism.
To divide
the
between
spectrum
the two.
as well.
Linearity on the one hand side, this follows that, follows this, follows that.
Yeah.
Hence, you have an objective algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
And the secondary to that is lost my train of thought. What did I say? I said I used the term.
Specifically, I don't know. Objectivism, solipsism, philosophy, religion.
Linearity and synchronicity. Sorry, my brain
linearity,
my brain
linearity and synchronicity. We brought that up before
my
too.
brain is just gapped on this, but in the
That's another big one, I think.
the objectivistic sphere, it's the linearity that's taken to be the compositor, if you will, of what's real. If this follows that, then follows this, then you have a solid algorithm to follow by. On the solipsistic side, it's synchronicity that is being paid attention to, in which coincidental or incidental events are taken to be part of a more singular narrative that is taken not based on its reality again, but based on its ethical quality. And its ethical quality is what gives it value as a real object versus a non-real one.
This, I think...
Or good or bad, rather.
This model, this piece of the model, I think can give a lot of people a really good idea of what it means when you come up against a quote-unquote political or ideological opponent in which your way of thinking does not work. Mm-hmm. It's a zero, void, blank. You're not connected. And see this spectrum, and you can understand why.
So the
potentially.
Yeah. So to expand on this, the kicker about this is that you don't get to be on one end of the spectrum or the other. You always are both. Mm-hmm. It's just that there's a bias involved. And you were mentioning religion and philosophy, and this has to do with that bias.
Right.
In which in the objectivistic side, the ethical takes a subservient role as being a solipsistic affair to begin with. And you get what's called a philosophy that tries to find objective realities that justify ethical questions. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the spectrum, again, you don't escape objectivism just because you gravitate as a bias towards solipsism. So, objectivistic truth,
you can put it in the, drop it in the,
becomes subservient to ethical questions, and the things that are accepted as true or quote unquote real, as it were to be on the objectivistic side, are things that would justify or provide a metaphorical algorithm for the narratological arc that had been perceived with regard to the ethic itself. So you find that in religion, where objective fact is being, for example, either stamped out or piggybacked on to justify some kind of weird claim about whatever religion, to show itself as an objective truth, as it were, and to sell itself to that market, despite it being an entirely solipsistic
despite anybody on
endeavor.
that side of the market looking at that explanation being like, what the fuck?
Right, it's entirely solipsistic to begin with in premise. And there's the confusion. So what's interesting about that is that the bias towards what's order, what's chaos is driving the same spectrum of stupidity in different ways, in which you get on the one hand side objectivistic religion and objectivistic philosophy and solipsistic religion on the other end. However, you can't define either religion or philosophy by mere objectivism or mere solipsism. It's the inversion of the dominant or the that which you would call order in the schema, being subservient to that which you would call chaos in the same schema, and with both sides arguing for their order element of the discussion at the expense of
Status
the nature.
almost.
The expense
I'm
of
the
the
order. No,
nature
I'm
of the
the order.
chaos that underlies it.
And it just becomes a whole other system.
So that's the spectrum of stupidity, as psychosis has it driven. And
Glad you went into those hardcore.
religion and philosophy sort of straddle the same spectrum of stupidity.
Ego
Meaning,
stuff.
don't bother with both, if as it were. Again, so with the question of charlatanism, this is exactly what the foothold they have by utilizing either religion or philosophy to
Give good feelings. We
to
got to anchor that much.
to recreate the sound bites that ultimately lead back to re-hijacking the conceit mechanism into further ego reproduction or replication, if you want.
And this can happen through rewarding sound bites of appearances of godliness, appearances of peace. This kind of stuff, praising the image, praising the sound bite, and leading and stringing on the participant.
At the end of it all of these boil down to: is this a transaction with the market that allows the self to be put on a conveyor belt of another narrative,
Right.
into the market, if you will, so that self can be returned on for another transaction,
And
so that its solidarity can be sort of maintained. On and on and on.
In order
and
to
on.
see these things, we would have to have a model for what is self-reference, what is the self, and what is this emergent quote-unquote object ego taking over the self, quote-unquote, and then is the system that I'm in part of that ego system market machine relation? Does it feel wrong even, or feel like, we're not really friends, we don't really know each other, like human relationship, even that you can get an intuitive feeling about this kind of stuff. But with a model, you can say, yes, I know what the ego does. It latches on like this. It keeps propagating the self through this affect, through tokens of feeling good, which if I do the right thing, then I get a good feeling back. It's conditional. It's not unconditional.
And this is the part, I think, of the book where we can reiterate back on our initial claims about this, what a charlatanism is, and put it into this context and say, this is why I was saying it, like, fundamentally you can recognize this charlatanism by the fact that is the soundbite still placing some kind of foreign conceit calculation so that self can appear in narrative again and again and again to hide, quote unquote, the ephemeral element of it, and
Keep sustaining
create
that
a
image
dream
ongoing
of an ongoing ubiquitous object that is called self, to which things either happen or which is part of
we
everything.
call this hijacked self ego.
As long as the ephemerality is hidden, it is hidden by sound bites that utilize conceit calculations to place it into the narrative. And since that is by definition what ego is, the foreign narrative, systemic narrative that keeps recycling it in an algorithmic way, that is by definition ego, where self went from ephemerality to solidarity.
So civilization did this to us through externalization, or the ego allowed civilization to have the externalization of processes from people in a way that such that you don't know anything about it, that you're just kind of, that's is on the market, I'm interacting with it.
Well, it's so
but the plateaus of commodification,
it's not I'm not looking for the word implicit, I'm just looking for the word, it's very hard to see.
My point kind of, I think, is that you
write something down and you read it 5 years later, it stayed there. That is the delusion of its eternality, if you will. Like,
the way we've
all
done,
of a sudden something is still there.
The way we've done civilization so far is one way, via the ego. Basically, that's what broke away and took off. But there are ways of having plateaus of commodification in order to have a social existence.
Nitpick.
Right, but do you see what I'm saying, though?
There
I wanted to show this, that an advanced enough tribe is having all of these.
There seems to be evidence, like, I don't know how true this is, but for example, there's evidence, for example, in the Indus Valley that they never, for example, there was an civilization, but there's evidence lacking in authoritative structuring in that civilization. So my take, this is personal.
And they get wiped out in war.
Yes.
In a snap.
My take is that civilization developed according to all arcs everywhere, but the ego-based ones are very much relentless and very... Even when civilization collapsed...
It's like the Borg. It's a Borg
It's like cancer.
Analogy.
It's like cancer.
It's the Borg.
This is why I'm saying cancer. Even when it collapsed on itself, there was straddling ideologies that made it reemerge. It's like killing cancer in your body and having some of it migrate to your lymph nodes and starting to shit anew, right? Like, this is why cancer is so dangerous, in that it migrates. So I think. So there's stages to that, right? So there's that. That's why there's stages to cancer. This is why there's stages to plateaus. Sure, yeah. And we're at the point of there's a huge ass tumor, and you can't irradiate it anymore. I
get it. I forget what the point was, though.
The point I was trying to make is, I was nitpicking on your idea of the ego-based civilization is the only emergent one. I think the isomorphic types have been...
So you were just giving an example to my point,
but
basically.
They were swept away.
So that's to my point. I wanted to point out the fact that these plateaus, you wouldn't call them plateaus of appropriation. I don't know. We try. That's not the right. It doesn't sound at all right. But this commodification appropriation dichotomy,
no, it's still commodification. It's still commodification. The premise is still the same. Stuff's representational substitution. It's what you do with it.
Yeah. So and that this is why transformation is possible, because right now the process of commodification has provided us with the exact blueprints of all the things that we need to simply, if you were to transition to something else, you still need all of what we've learned. You don't wipe that clean, right? You don't wipe out the education
literally
database.
The guild is another layer of commodification, but taken in the plateau and taken in what came before
just sits on
the
top.
Plateau.
It's totally legit.
And letting it be in the same language pool.
It's 100% legit.
It's still a commodification. It's just a matter of commodifying the models within the language of the current plateau.
And it happens in a way that does not look like the ego flame diagram.
Which is like a fine line, because it's
if we're sitting on top of something,
paying lip service, for example, and being rewarded by the system for merely paying lip service to something is one of the easiest way for the system to recuperate even this.
What if they just
example we go say we go on a wild idea. Somebody likes this, we go on a talk show. As long as we're on a fucking talk show and talking about it, guess what we're not doing?
Well, I disagree. Because education is part of it, and that's...
Us deciding to sit here and talk about it ourselves was one thing. But I'm saying, imagine.
It would be hard to keep context.
Wild idea. This takes off.
Well, this is basically that.
We now become in demand for here. I'm not saying this will happen. I'm saying how the system recuperates.
Or that we would even want it to happen.
I'm just talking about how the system recuperates.
Recuperation.
What does it do? As soon as Greta, whatever her speech was.
So
as soon as she
we
talked,
have to remain like, what do you call it? Recluses from broadcast media, like such events.
But that's the other extreme.
Right. But you see, if you can have that mystery, then you have the back and forth pull, right? Why are they so reclusive?
Well, this is the case.
But we're just working.
This is the This is the literal.
Meeting. We're just talking to our peeps.
This would be a literal exercise of maintaining the shelter.
Right.
Sustaining
don't
the
agree
shelter.
to participate in certain things.
And sustaining the shelter and balancing and going moment by moment by moment. Today, this is the correct decision to go and speak.
You have to
Tomorrow,
think,
it is not.
Sure, yeah, and it could be.
That's like literally what I'm referring to.
And in many cases of leadership, you want to be modeling a model of behavior that's not what should I do necessarily, but I'm showing people how to behave. Does everybody go on a talk show? Does everybody go? Not
danger zone.
But we all do that because everyone around us sees what we're doing.
This is the devotional temperament in and of itself.
So you want to throw in the danger that.
But the danger is that if your role model is quote unquote perfection itself, you are already punished by not being perfect. Because it's an impossible
Punished
target.
Through the ego,
it's an impossible target.
Feels bad.
So for the ego, this is only a starting point that there is something perfect. But this has to be reflected that perfection already is present within whoever is attempting to modify, resonate or
mastery,
connect with. Right? The charlatan will keep your perfection profile low so that trinkets can be sold,
right,
if they're sound bites, so that you can quote unquote climb the ladder, which is unclimbable. That's why it's so. That's why there's a danger in the impossible.
Right, and the image, because the participant only takes up the image and sees the idealized version,
which already punishes them to begin with.
So yeah, this is where it's happening.
It's necessary for one thing, that the quality of punishment is necessary only for one thing. There is something to do.
Right.
But once that quality is realized, that perfection has to be matched. It says that this and that is the same thing. Like the mere conceptualization of going past that.
Yes, correct. So
that perfection.
The instructions themselves melt into the experience of reality.
In charlatanism, this will not happen. Because in charlatanism, the mere attempt to the full no. This
the
is
attempt
just
to do it hooks you up to the market again. You're waiting for a signal from the outside.
The next and the next and the next and what's the next one to be sold to?
Reward.
Which next soundbite to? Which next class to go to? And this is another reason why you find that focus is the last step towards membership, which happens in the Immunity Guild. The only reason of which it happens to be a second guild, not the first, is because to make mention of it is where constitutes the first one, whereas any outflow of it is the combined.
And I have a feeling we're going to go into details on that today.
So it's a very short loop.
Field guide.
There's no more to it. No further trinket. All the rest of the guild dynamics is just further elaboration on the same thing.
Right, at different scales or whatever.
The first scale is what's in your skin, perhaps what's in your walls, The second scale is
your initial sphere of control, of individual quote-unquote control, influence.
That includes the objects within your vicinity and the people within your vicinity. It includes the conversations within your vicinity or the lack of conversations within the vicinity. Hygiene and maintenance, those are the two intricate things. And all of that formulates the social sphere as well, environment. And the environment is already a given. It's just that if you want to make that more explicit, you can you can start to look at focus as part of what you do in the environment as well, as opposed to say yourself and your body and in your room or your apartment, house, and so
scale
on.
It up.
Right. So environment just means take what inside to outside. And you're already doing this.
Type of management strategies and modeling strategies of the inside, and then move that out, and that's
which is you're already implicitly
this is where
practiced
where
on.
we want to go with the book for sure.
Yeah, which is something you already are practiced on by being told things like, okay, if you just are in your room, cool. There is like the environment. There's the cleanliness of it, and then there is the stuff that utility of it. First layer. But that's external. You can also do this internal, your mental ideas. There's good ideas, bad ideas. Should follow these, don't follow these. So it's already already are in an implicit environment with your room, doing this to yourself. So once you make the jump itself explicit, it's not me, it's environment as well. Nothing's changed.
Right.
Literally nothing's changed except a more inclusive language.
Scope of operations.
An interface with this language and that language, for example.
Right.
And the rest of the
You'll
guilds
find
follow the same.
heavy isomorphisms between the languages too to discuss the archetypal.
Exactly. And the picture that should be shown from this is that stepping up from one natural guild to the next in the stack does not involve any further commodities or shifts or anything. The work is done. Focus is focus is focus is focus. It's not a stagnant.
Yeah, right.
But it's not stagnant in this case. As you can see, it's elaborating upon itself over and over again.
This is an example of what you meant. We're talking about simplicity. Is that it's such a simple thing. When something's established and you stack upon it, you just leave it there. It doesn't change. It keeps providing and providing throughout the stack, which requires, through holonic modeling, is
the elaboration continues, but the elaboration of what it's about is not in moving.
Standing on a plateau of many plateaus.
Well, it's utilizing the plateau as the fact.
1,000 plateaus?
Shut up.
How many? I haven't read it.
Well, no. The point is that the plateau is the plateau. So even if you don't focus, you still have plateau. With focus, the plateau is more utilitarian, or more representative of the isomorphism that underlies it, that is masked by the scarcity that is presented.
I think that we often don't understand the models of our reality. We don't know them. We don't investigate them. So it's like an unknown. Even if
we're actually seeing an example of the utilization of plateau, and manipulating it into reflecting what it's from, despite the fact that it's hiding it.
Right.
In model speak, English fucking sucks.
Right. So model speak sits on top of English.
Model speaks uses English, or it will use Russian, it would use Hebrew, it would use Chinese, it would use anything.
It would take a translator to do that.
And it would just say, okay, use these words
What's
this
the closest
way
word?
On top of what you already know. And by doing that, another picture emerges.
If the translator was a member, that would probably work out pretty
And this
easy.
is a property of the incompleteness theorem. The reason is very, very fucking dumb and stupid on its face, but it's fucking brilliant. All that incompleteness theorem is saying is that statements will emerge about the system, from the system, that do not follow from any statement made in the system. So the system will be composed of a particular language, right?
Yes.
And
that's how you expose. And
it would say you can move from this string to the next string. So this representation can move from this to this to this to this. This is a formal rule set, right? The problem that it encounters with incompleteness is that when it's sophisticated enough, statements in it appear about it, not derived from going from statements about it.
Incompleteness theorem
or statements in it.
For me, links to uncertainty.
It has that property as well.
Like we should almost be able to say, hey, if you're researching primordial archetypes about uncertainty, look at the completeness theorem and understand that.
What it means for uncertainty with regards to complex adaptive system is that for all the uncertainty you could possibly try to resolve within the lower layers, there will be that much more that you will not be able to capture anyway. It doesn't matter how deep you go. That ocean,
right?
That
but
ocean
it also
bigger.
Means plainly on
and
its face,
contradictions will happen.
It means that no matter what your system speaks, it's in its configurations.
It's not saying
there will be something that's outside of that which is valid.
Correct.
In the same speaking layer of language, but you don't know where it came from.
You can't reach it. Yes.
So this breaks down the wall of uncertainty to any kind of system which thinks I am the system, I know all.
It makes it worse because the statements that appear within that system that cannot be arrived at,
right,
also tend to self-reference. So things about the system as a whole
has to. That's why it's viable, because it self-references.
Yes, this is.
Don't make me shout. I will yell at you.
The statements as a whole about the system appear in it, and when interpreted, yields correct results.
Yeah.
Or worse. Correct results or incorrect results depending on how you approach it.
Right. Could be really bad. But you're right. The thing could come around where it's like, okay, I run that code. My system validates the output as great, but I don't know how that came about. Where did this code come from?
It all sounds really complicated, but paradoxes are the bee's knees of this problem. This statement is false. It's said in the language of the system, right?
Yeah, but you can't come to it.
If you assume the truth of my statement, then you have to tell yourself that what I just said was false. If you assume the falsehood of my statement, you have to assume its truth, and so on and so forth. That is the contradiction. You get statements within systems
and
that talk about themselves or other aspects of the system that cannot be arrived at by the system.
Two ways to approach this statement that you made to me. One is in the dream, in which either way I look at it goes into a spin. The other way I think is in the moment, in which it's just a statement that exists that I encountered.
Right. You can suspend the statement in the air and then look at it from the perspective
I can agree that I encountered that statement.
You encountered that statement and then assess it. If I were to take it as truth,
one way,
it
goes
becomes
this way.
false.
If I do this way, it becomes the other.
And then you can do that. Absolutely.
And that is the communication of
that is the next layer.
Bite.
Because then it becomes a statement about that statement. And so on and so forth it goes.
Sure.
And all within the same language, still layering up. At least in a meta-narratological sense.
Layering up, yep. Different languages, different units.
And all that we wanted to really say with that is make a comment about uncertainty, and that in the complex adaptive system context, right, each layer has a built-in ongoing uncertainty within it.
Right.
So as the next layer forms up, it can still talk about itself in ways that it doesn't understand where it came from.
And moreover, it must incorporate within itself its own language about talking about itself in order to modify itself. Otherwise, it's that destructive shit. There has to be that module brought up from the very bottom, which the uncertainty...
With the ignorance for the possibility that there are multiple interpretive frameworks for a single set of information, which is what the system insists upon. Right? Like the example of the history of the Maori tribes, for example. If this is the only definitive algorithm by which to go by, all the other ones are not.
Right. Artificial scarcity, once again.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, for sure. So, where are we at? Where do you think we're at with this, with the book?
Well,
I know we've just got into field guide a bit.
With this discussion, we've reached a point in saying that there is a trick to the system that tries to narrow down scope for context such that uncertainty is ignored.
Mm-hmm. The most fundamental archetype makes the whole all the rest of it clown show.
And just a side comment, if you look at doubt, risk, and regulation, they're not accepted as viability, a viable element of reality. They are not in this diagram, but the way they're treated in general is that doubt is bad, risk is bad, regulation is all the rage. Which means, at least according to our little diagram, that we're neglecting 2 steps of the 3. Doubt is not considered a natural phenomena. It is, but it's considered as something to be avoided at all costs.
Right. That fundamentalist, like, how could you? Are you not a believer? Are you? I thought you were my son.
So, as a reflection of that phenomena, the what do you call it? Not the police state, but the monitoring state that we are engaging in with cameras and Surveillance. That's the word. Surveillance is a way to haphazardly admit to both doubt and risk, but not treat it as something that is part of the reality that is given, but rather as a problem to be solved only. In other words, there could be no doubt, and everything you do cannot be risky. And we see that in the corporate world all the time, where doubts are avoided and risks are never taken. Or never is a strong word, but
you ideally think that this is what's being presented, is that it's low risk,
Right, risk becomes more of the less of it is, the better the prospect for acting upon it.
But everything is being uncertain a risk. Every venture that we make.
Look at it another way. Like
risky.
All the big risks, not when they're not being addressed, accumulate and culminate.
Right. So the whole plateaus, all these plateaus of civilization, without having to properly addressing the systemic risk going on, and we're all just offloading to that to depend on it.
So this is a comment
Recipe
on
for
the zeitgeist.
disaster.
This is the comment of where the neglect and the zeitgeist and the soul comes from. By a complete skipping of this into just regulation and standardization. To further comment on that, we still have that in our archetypes. Not because regulation is bad or standardization is bad or any of that is bad, but simply because when you take doubt and risk as part and parcel of what's happening, right? Regulating around it and by recognizing what it is and how to deal with it and as it comes up is still a viable form of moving forward. So it's not that regulation itself is bad, it's just regulation in lieu of understanding the nature of risk and the nature of doubt and the fact that they're ubiquitous to experience due to stacking of the complex adaptive system to begin with. The neglect of that process itself is the one thing that makes it an operation unto itself as opposed to an operation for a purpose.
I'm reminded of the term anti-fragile, and that's something you can look up and probably find a single author who did something like a number of years back to define this basically, but to making systems that are anti-fragile, you have to include these uncertainties. You have to know that they're there, and you have to build for that this can die at any time. This can die at any time. Whatever your service inputs, whatever your inputs are, they could just die.
What's interesting here, and I agree with you, and I had a different thought.
So the guild is inherently anti-fragile through incorporating risk. Has to be.
What I'm talking about leads to the conclusion that regulation must itself be regulated in accordance of uncertainty, doubt, and risk. And let me see if I can make the same assumption about the next line and the one after that.
Sure.
Standardization has to deal with the entropy. Okay, regulation has to deal with the uncertainty, doubt, and risk that are inherent. Standardization will have to deal with the inherent entropy that stems out of uncertainty in the effort of preservation so that value propositions remain somewhat stable or have meaning, not stable. Value proposition stability cannot be what is standardized upon.
The proposition is
it's the fact of entropy, and
that you can preserve structures.
It's the fact of entropy and the decisions of what needs preservation and what does not that drives value proposition.
Right.
And standards are meant to capture these contexts.
Yep.
Yeah, zoning cannot be for the...
Closely related to shelter there, by the way. Just basically defining what needs to be here and what does not.
So what we're really seeing here is that if state itself is segregated from the rest and simply does regulation for the sake of regulation, standardization for the sake of standardization, zoning for the sake of zoning, all of which are profits. With the neglect of the other archetypes,
prophets or deities?
We're getting into a situation of the runaway. Prophets, I'm sorry?
Or deities.
Isn't that the same thing?
Well, maybe. We can appropriate it later. Sorry, continue.
It's the same picture we've painted with the state being the sole arbitrator of correct and incorrect. It's always been a binary sort of archetype, right? Yes and no. This is order. This is chaos.
But doesn't the state ultimately have to have some kind of transformation?
Well, that's what we're getting at, and what this is showing us is the source of this transformation.
Right.
All of these constraints.
Dependency, constraint. Mm-hmm.
So the case where we're making for the case for the runaway civilization being this column detached from the rest
Right.
With this column serving as a subservient function, still detached.
Yeah, even like I was just thinking there, like it seems pretty.
It's using these.
Pretty clear that
it's using the. It's
that's
using,
where we've been talking about a breakaway civilization, if you will.
So this is still this is still the way it should be, if you will. Like, we're not trying to say this is wrong, this setup is wrong, and this is why things are going wrong.
It's only worked so far because of how good it is.
So what we're saying is that on the one hand side, going from here to here,
in some aspects,
if you take care of every step of the way, the whole thing works in unison like a whole on. But if you start with top down, with this subservient to this, what you get is the yes-no binary working for itself, using these as the mechanisms to do it with, like setting up transactions and setting up
and so
strategies to do
to
do these things.
Talking about the line between
and then
order and chaos.
On top of it all, the corporate column will use the personal column to to sell the sadistic and masochistic commodities, to maintain identity, to maintain purpose, to maintain relations, to maintain roles, skills. Skills is a big one. For example, certification, which that allow for roles.
Right.
So you see how, if you come from this angle and start from this angle, it's the same system that created it to begin with, but it's broken in the sense that this is exploiting this. And at this point of exploitation, none of these come up.
Right. And that's the purpose of this ego stack, is to exploit one above the other, to scratch others down while you scramble upwards towards the reward, away from the punishment.
So the reason for regulation, which is uncertainty, is lost. The reason for standardization, which is entropy, is lost. By lost, I mean it's not in the conversation. It's not part of the narrative.
Correct.
The reason that there's zoning due to space and time constraints is lost. The reason that there is an audit because matter is finite is lost. It's only for quantifying it, accounting for it, and auditing for what is accounted for, that it's done for. Like, again, life as the objective and the process is lost. There's just objectives and processes. Death as the reason that performance and project management and feedback all matter, because this is how things die if they don't perform and manage themselves within.
This is
sustenance and maintenance right there.
The life cycle going on through space and time.
Yeah, and so we can continue to go up these archetypes over and over and over again, but the primordial element that had been the reason for all these things to begin with, that's what's lost. That's what's neglected. So when we're talking about the soul,
good point.
When we're talking about the soul, when it's as a quality, a negative quality of something that's been missing or hollowed out of it, this is the stack that we can refer to, that is the subject of the neglect.
Nice. And in like an APS sense of this is what reality is.
Oh yeah, this is all APS.
How we're describing it. And I want to get to the other charts too. I'm glad that you like really kind of dived in there on the first section with the chaos of this we call the primordial archetypes chart. We still have the natural guilds to go through if we like, and the neurochemical operating system, the strange loop between the two, which we were describing earlier. We should get that up in here, and I want to go into the charts and the social aspect, and like these are the models we use to make society.
I wanted to catch up because there's another term, subjectivity, that we never really covered, but it's really simple.
The spectrum of subjectivity?
Spectrum of subjectivity. It has to do with...
we brought up philosophy and
on
religion.
The one side.
We did, though.
And then religion on the other side, which we described as inversions of solipsism and objectivism. But they
and trying to reach out to the other and thinking, aha, I've got it.
Right.
So I've incorporated everything.
So this is the other spectrum that flows out of that. It's the spectrum of subjectivity and
between a philosophical and
religious positions. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's really short on that. The reason I think I want to mention that is because subjectivity is part of the big diagram in the dream thing, and which has subjects, objects, aspects, and types, and all of that stuff. It actually fits into that conversation we don't need to have right now. But yeah, subjectivity is another element that is playing a role here.
So like in the APS area up in the top there, describing objects and the interactions.
Yeah, so I tried to place it as concentric circles. Mm-hmm. Because subjects, you can jump within a subject, in a subject, within a subject.
Now, you are kind of, I would say, from my perspective...
Which is another form of stacking, like, subjective stacking.
Uniquely equipped to describe this because you're programming history and background, and you're, like, and the application to the model, specifically the dream at the top of that chart, where it's these concentric circles you're talking about, and like subjects and aspects and all this stuff. You know it from programming, yet miraculously it also works with cognitive perception.
Well, that's because
go figure that, because there's an isomorphism between programming and reality.
Programming is a way to
programs
describe
reality.
Thoughts. Programming is a way to try to describe thoughts.
Poetry
is a way to describe thoughts.
Prose
is a way to describe thoughts. I mention this because from the APS perspective, where it's mostly like programming, subjective elements to the APS are nested. So the idea being is we're trying to describe the experience, the quality of being in a thought that leads to one more thought upon which it is built, and another, which changes the context slightly. Say you're talking about being in a place, and then you're describing a room in that place, right? You never left the original context,
but it shifted. Things have shifted.
But then there is an interesting element to it. Imagine going into a room within a place, but exiting that room, and yet you're in another place, because what you've done in that room is different. So, physical analogy, you used an elevator, for example. It's a very simple metaphor,
I suppose,
for that.
Like floors as being different.
Yeah, that's one example of that idea. So the idea of the subject is that not only is there objective things that are happening, but the meaning of the objective things shifts in moments because subjects nest.
Right, so that's aspects.
So in the elevator example, why it's a good example to demonstrate this is just because you never left the same building. So the context of the building you entered to is the same.
Find the big diagram.
Is the same. But then you enter the context of the elevator, which creates around it the context of floor. You're still in the building, but entering the elevator, now you have an inner circle between the two, says floor.
Sure.
You go up a floor, the context of floor changes, the building context doesn't change, and the elevator context doesn't change, but the structure of the three-tiered whatever is different than it would have been if you're on a different floor than this one.
Right. So any organization, you'll see this happening. Let's say you have an office on a floor and you go to different departments, just all in the same space, people talking, whatever. You go to this department, now that's a different floor, quote unquote, different. They speak a different language potentially.
Yeah, and it's like being the father or the uncle or the friend or the husband, or no, I'm just talking for me.
Sure.
Or like you're not
So you
you're
could even
not
be
changing. The
you could be
environment is
sitting
even the same.
You could be sitting in a chair at a reunion or a party with family. And
Exactly.
now I'm this identity, now I'm that identity.
And you never talk to your grandma like you talk to your wife, because if you did, you.
Yeah,
let's might be other discussions involved.
Let's not
here.
make jokes right now. There's a joke.
I'm trying to point to the extremes and examples because those are the ones that hit home, right? But yeah, like imagine just for a second how cringy it would be to discuss the same subject matter with your grandmother that you would normally discuss with your wife. Very different feeling.
Sometimes.
But subjectively, are you different? Not really. Subjectively, are you in a different environment if it's a get together?
Yeah, no, that's a fact. On the radio even they said, they were just a poll or something, I don't know how we got, but they said everybody, like 70% of people claim to be a totally different person at work than they are from at home.
Which
that's just then, and is that creepy? No, actually, its context is completely different.
Well,
so why would you be the same?
There's a perfect explanation for this. Huxleyan transformed into Orwellian environments. So the top circles, if you will, of the top subjective circles stayed the same, and the elevator was taken down, transferred through, and appeared in another circle. Mm-hmm. So the elevator might have stayed the same. You took the same car that you did to your vacation that you did to your work. Cool. But entering that premises created a whole different subjective stack under which you are located.
Yep. The opposites of Huxley and Orwell.
Well, one is consumption, the other is production. They're always going to be interlinked. You have to force production so that...
Right. It does seem like kind of a black and white.
So that the rewards of consumptions can be realized.
Maybe like that almost could be added to this chart. The square, right? Orwell.
Yeah.
Huxley.
Yeah. Which is interesting because this is also the same division for order and chaos, and it puts Huxley as chaos, so your liberalism, and Orwell as order, so your fundamentalism. What do we see in the world today?
Well, we have lots of good people. Shoulders of giants.
Tea time.
Did he write an instruction manual? Did they both write instruction manuals?
Nah, they just lamented.
Lamented. It was already a done deal. And with that, we'll be right back. The system. Do 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 do. Well, so this is the last probably half hour of our little dev meeting here. Cheers! It's been productive, wildly productive, and good.
So
I like all the details. So
we wanted to jump in to.
We do want to go over these charts that we promised to ourselves, at least.
Yeah, and I would posit it as, so if subjectivity is the one way you can go with this, where you have religion and philosophy as being a spectrum between solipsism and objectivism again.
Ways of describing reality, I guess, talking about.
What we propose is an alternative view of the spectrum of stupidity that is not based on subjectivity and is more meant to distill misapprehensions on the one hand, and also illuminate what we call the strange loop that underlies the complex adaptive systems underneath it all on the other, in a more explicit sense. And the stack.
All right. Well,
So-
we start the market machine section with complex adaptive systems and animism discussion, right?
Right, and then we kind of say that there's a plateau that sort of cuts a lot of things out,
Right.
creating a
The
scarcity
market machine,
in the,
etc.
in the playing field.
Right, and so these charts we're about to bring up, these are the isomorphic side of things, the polymorphic machine, presented as ways of modeling what structures are happening, what's happening, what holons are building
So-
up, and how are they holoning.
So it's like a way to circumvent the scarcity presented with a view about the scarcity that involves where it originated from. Again, self-reference.
Yep.
And with that, I just don't want to have any further ado to sort of posit them. On the one hand side, on the philosophical side, of the
Right.
subjectivity spectrum, which is driven by an objective sort of bias.
Right.
We present the neurochemical operating system, which is just a small change to the neural operating system in terms of wording. Truth of the matter is that the system we're discussing is, at the very least, sees its origin in chemistry. The detail of which doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that it's an operating system that matters. And on the
Here
other
are
end of the spectrum,
your
we
layers.
want to present the primordial archetypes as the template for which to see the religious perspective of subjectivism, sort of also in an effort to undercut the view. And the two stacks that we are describing are actually not coincidental in any way. They are meant to expose a strange loop that is missed by latching on to one or the other side of the spectrum.
Right.
So again, this is about self-reference, and this template is meant to demonstrate that self-reference much more concretely than general discussion could.
And so we're bringing up a completely different chart right now. These are the other two that we haven't touched on yet. And that's yours.
The archetypes still matter because the archetypes cover the
just trying to get
religious
this in view
side.
here.
the natural guild stack that is being tagged on top of it is meant to discuss the layering that is resultant from
So
from
this
these
is
two templates.
this is our mission.
And the consequence on the ontological matrix is the natural guild stack forming from that.
For the next half hour, our mission, I think, is to put these
So this
charts
is-
into context.
this is
These
emergent.
next three, because we're going to need these three moving to the social.
So this is emergent.
And I'm just going to zoom out.
Yeah,
slight
I just
bit
really
here.
want to point this out. If you look at this as a spectrum, on this
Okay,
side
we
you
gotta put
have
it on the. So we got the neurochemical operating system.
dude,
Here?
you're messing me up.
We got the primordial archetypes. And then we got
These need to
the
be left and right, and
natural
this needs to
guilds.
be above. Okay, so the point I'm trying to demonstrate with this discussion is that in the subjectivity spectrum, you'll have your neural operating system sitting towards more on the left with the objectivistic bias
Okay, right.
on the spectrum of stupidity. The primordial archetype take the slot of religion on
Right.
the subjective spectrum, and with the solipsistic bias
Yep.
of the spectrum of stupidity.
And just looking at the primordial archetypes, you can see that. It
And-
seems clear that it's a subjective.
And then, as a clarifying point, since we're using these overlays on top of the ontological matrix that is a scarce, that is artificially scarce, the point of bringing these stacks is that the natural guild stack is the emergent stack that occurs as a consequence of using these templates to distill and understand these spectrums, right? So this all comes back down to the question of, now that we've laid down this commodification plateau that has all of these problems associated with it, and how we call it the runaway civilization and death cycle and everything else, I just overlay onto the spectrums that it had itself produced, the spectrum of stupidity and subjectivity, which
to
is
see it for what it is, use a model
to see it for what it is.
Right.
That it itself causes, or is rather, the very shelter within the commodification plateau,
right.
that
which allows the
within which-
guild to exist.
Yeah, right. It is that barrier that we're trying to distill by, and calling the natural, what's within the barrier, the natural guilds. So all of that is again solipsistic mumbo jumbo, which is where the idea of focus comes into play, which allows it to be more than just solipsistic mumbo jumbo and become a full-blown superstition by an actual enactment, the critical quote-unquote activism that you've been referring to.
Yep.
This is the
Good term.
critical action items, focus, that are involved in this conceptual barrier being maintained, sustained, and being a thing onto itself as a hyperstition and a reality after the fact.
Right. And we say that's what focus is itself.
So,
Focus back on the self-reference, guided through a model.
so yeah, if we use the neural OS stack and the primordial archetype stack as constraints in our allowance to become philosophical or religious, if we use those as the constraints for our philosophy
yeah.
or our religion,
I see where you're going.
It forms a natural. Hopefully, this is the claim here.
Right. No. People. Some will do it right. Some will not do it right. It depends on if you're a member of the guild or not.
Yeah. The idea is that is the emergent element is the membrane of the guild under which guild dynamics holds, and its maintenance and sustenance is expressed by this third stack that's not only about the realization about philosophy or religion, but really the consequences to what to do from that point on. So, context, dream, moment-to-moment template on top of that. That's the relationship between the stacks as a whole.
Context, dream, moment to moment. That's what you're trying to say, from left to right to up?
Context, dream, the template of moment-to-moment articulation given this context.
Mm-hmm.
So, education,
right, yeah.
Education constrained to this. Immunity constrained to the nature of this. Environment constrained to the nature of this. This is entirely emergent, moment by moment activity.
Yes, and it's
in light of this
even
template.
The fact of starting with education, compare that with uncertainty, for example. It's a much more. This is what you're doing about it. This is the structure that of the guild that comes about and arises. That there are people taking care of each of these guilds, stacking up in order to make an emergent sort of organization. You take care of all of these guilds, and then organization emerges.
Even if that organization is yourself. Your education, your immunity, your environment, your tech, your data or knowledge, your ability to dispense with activity, your ability to put your activity into a grander context that is industry, your ability to negotiate that ability, your ability to make that to transform into something else. And then being calculated about it, and then being preemptive about it, and then being holistic about it, which is the rest of the guilds. Computing, Sentient, Natural OS.
Yep. So to me, looking at these charts, this is now where I'm feeling like this is beyond the self, so to speak, and into the social, because this is how you're creating structures.
Well, this is, yes, in the context of the commodification plateau, in the ontological matrix sense, we are now dealing with a full-blown market machine, which is social in its or entity. There's no personality to it. So yes, this immediately makes the jump from not only what am I doing for myself, but in the context of this grander shelter that is already a given.
With other neurochemical units.
Which but the key is that it's already a given, and the degrees of coherence, for example, only make a statement about your realization at one level as member for yourself, or the realization everybody's a member and everybody's doing this.
Right.
So that very same jump in coherence is displayed here in that the entirety of the spectrum has to deal with
and how do you
how
discover
everybody is going through it. Everybody's
exactly. The commonality,
everybody's religious, everybody's philosophical.
The commonality comes through the self-reference of seeing that what I am is the same as what's been replicated out there too. And, in many ways. Fundamentally.
I forget what my original point was here. The point was being, how is this moving from the self to the social thing? And the explanation that we're given is the fact that these things are kind of, for lack of a better word, universal. And it's this universality that that bridges what is self to what is social here. And so
right, a shared understanding underlying, we're speaking the same language on standing on the same stacks. We're recognizing of peers that are using the same stacks.
And it's the same mechanism that allows egos to stack. Right? Because ego stacks by virtue of the fact that an overreaching system exerts rewards and punishment, and agency can be obtained by feeding into one of the reward and punishment streams.
And there you go. You get the result.
So it's already assuming the social. We're just hijacking the same language that it hijacked. Even more so, we're hijacking it because it hijacked that same language, and building on top of that to say, this is already pointing to the fact that self organization is social organization, because this is something that the ego, despite its ubiquitousness and lack of interest, lack of being differentiated in and of itself, it still demonstrates through agency that it cannot be one thing. It's pointing back to the fact that it needs to have a variety,
and context matters.
So despite of its own elemental structure denying it, its own linguistic structure denying this premise, it relies on the very same premise to exist. And
Yep, I'm glad we got into these charts a little bit, and even I think we linked that segue pretty good. Like this, the solipsism and objectivism as two different sides of this chart, right? Like solipsism, objectivism, and taking these and seeing, okay, this is really what's emerging in a holonic type of organization. Forget about the fighting this way or that way. This is what you need to be. But what both, I think, perspectives can get together on. Right?
This is the taper.
This is both. What organization is. We're back to polymorphic organization, polymorphic machinery.
Whether you want to learn about physicality, biology, neurology, mental signal sending, any of those things, or whether you want to learn about uncertainty, entropy, space-time, matter, life, and death. And any of these subjects, it really doesn't matter how far you go up the stack. The point being is that out of all of this emerges a way of representation of those elements, and this is captured by education.
Right. And that's the first way, and anybody could agree on that. And now let's fight over education.
There's no need to fight, because this education is, interestingly, very constrained. Because it only really points back to the neural operating system as being the basis of itself,
right.
and the primordial archetypes. So the entire discussion of the two sides of the spectrum
Yes.
are the education, and the rest of the education is what to do about that.
Right. So like this is about that and about that for other things before it can proceed upwards.
Or give merit to.
You must be talking about it in context of these.
But by doing this, it also gives context for immunity, because the only thing it's establishing is the fact that there's an ontological matrix with an artificial scarcity thing going on,
isn't
within
immunity,
which a membrane for a new organism is being projected for hyperstitional purposes.
potentially? Isn't
The guild. This is this picture.
Yeah, the guild, of course.
Fuck.
Then correct.
Where's my picture?
Isn't like education being modeled? Remember at the start of the book, there's discussion about charlatanism, and so if education is just the ability to read a book or to have something presented to you potentially as models, then is immunity not somehow checking that, like relying like the feedback, observation?
Well, I think
tracking?
this is a confusion of using education as a noun versus education as a verb, because look at the way we presented it thus far. We have a spectrum of subjectivity, religious and philosophical, right, out of which an activity of education emerges to take those into account. So if this is the context, this is the activity.
So this is actually
this
religious.
is moment by moment. No.
This is philosophical.
Read like layers.
Oh, because this is a solipsistic.
Yes.
Philosophical
Is
tries to ground in objectivism. Right.
to use logic and all that.
Yeah, as the grounds, the basis. And of course here, the more subjective.
So these, what's philosophy and religion. So this is your masochism, masochistic commodity. This is your sadistic commodity. Shit. This is your sadistic commodity.
Right, masochism on the subjectivist side.
Yeah, this is your masochistic commodity.
Yeah, right. No, all kinds of, so many things lining up here. And again, this I think is, we've fleshed out market machine so much, and the ego and all of that, and all the,
We need to go, by the way.
the nitty gritties of interactions. But we do need to actually piece out. Yeah, maybe we got 5 minutes to, at best, wrap up. Where did we want to go? I still wanted to give a better.
We now need to create guild dynamics out of our. We are now on our plateau. We've set up our shelter in the circle, and now we need to stack.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And this is the stack. It's the natural guild stack. That's it.
So yeah, it's always the rubber hitting the road and shit like that. But like, every guild should have a database of, say, cards, index cards that you use.
Once we get through the natural guilds.
See what I'm saying? Like,
once we get through the natural guilds, we can divide the guild structure into fundamental, natural, and proximal. Briefly touch on fundamental because it's part of what we're seeing here, but continue on with the proximal guilds simply because they are that. They are your gardens, they are your machine shops.
Well, it's the first thing you see. You don't know how to abstract
houses,
that.
They are your
we
people.
use the model to abstract these proximal guilds into conventional
Well,
guilds.
that's the Holy Grail right
such
now.
as the Gardener's Guild.
This is the Holy Grail of the book, right? To get to proximal
I want
guilds.
the book to be able to show people how to do that.
So proximal guilds is the last chapter.
And probably
And we're-
using index cards.
So
I'm
once,
just saying.
okay, cool. But once the natural guilds are sorted through, the guild can be divided into its fundamental natural guild and
Right.
proximal guild
Yeah, yeah,
structure
yeah.
briefly.
So
because
this is
the
this is
fundamental
the
guild
model, in other words.
Because the fundamental guild
being the
discussion
archetype.
is this discussion to begin with, so we covered that immediately. Self-reference for the win. And then circling back
Right.
to the proximal guilds to finish everything off, to say how the gardens will be run, how the fucking shops will be run, how everything else will be
And
run.
then that's when you need deck protocol and like actual databases to like organize people.
So the only reason we can't talk about it with other people yet is because we're not fucking ready.
Right, but we knew that. And with that, gentlemen and ladies, it's been awesome. A privilege.
Yes. And come back for my food and hat.
Oh yes.
Hat food.
So we've actually got, of course, we could have gone for another hour almost, but
It's 5.
them's the chops. It is 5. You like to do what? Oh yes, we all like to keep our testicles.